Welcome to the Blackout Witness. When the power goes out, everything changes. Streets turn silent, houses become shadows, and for a few minutes, the world feels much bigger and much less safe. Tonight's stories come from people who saw something during those dark hours. Some were alone, some had nowhere to run, and some still do not know what was watching them when the lights finally came back on. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, unsettling feel, subscribe to the Blackout Witness. Turn off the lights, if you dare. Let's begin. I was sleeping in my parents' bed with them when it happened. I do not remember exactly why I was in their bed that night. I may have had a bad dream earlier, or maybe I was sick, or maybe I had simply climbed into bed with them because I was young and wanted to be close to my parents. Whatever the reason, I remember waking up between them as the sun was beginning to come up. The room was not fully bright yet. It was that early morning light that comes before the day truly begins. The blinds were closed, but thin lines of pale gold and gray light were slipping through them. The room was still mostly dark, but not the deep black of nighttime. Shapes were becoming visible. I could see the outline of furniture, the curtains, the bedroom door, and the window across from the bed. My parents were still asleep beside me. The house was quiet. There was no television on. No one was moving around. No cars passed loudly outside. It was one of those rare, silent moments just before the world wakes up, when even a familiar bedroom can feel different. I woke up slowly at first. I remember opening my eyes and lying there for a few seconds, not fully awake yet. I could hear my parents breathing. I could see the early sunlight pushing through the blinds. Everything felt calm. Then I started to sit up. That was when I noticed something standing by the window. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. It was tall, or at least, it looked tall to me. I was a child at the time, so almost everything seemed larger than it probably was, but I would guess now that it stood around 6 feet tall. It was standing with its back to the bed, facing the window as though it had been there for some time. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It just stood there, looking out through the blinds toward the rising sun. My first thought was not that it was a monster. I do not think I had any thought at all for the first few seconds. My mind was trying to understand why someone would be standing at the bedroom window while my parents slept only a few feet away. The figure wore something like a robe. It was brown, dark and dull in the early morning light, and the material looked heavy. The best way I can describe it is that it looked itchy, woolly, and rough. It did not look like modern clothing. It looked more like a thick old robe, something handmade or worn for warmth, with a hood pulled over its head. The hood hid much of the back of its head. Its hands were folded behind its back. That detail is strange, but it is one of the clearest things I remember. It stood there with its hands behind it, almost politely, as if it were deep in thought. It did not look restless. It did not look like it was searching the room. It did not look like it had come to hurt anyone. It looked like it was watching the sunrise. I sat up a little farther. I was staring at it from behind. I remember being confused, but I was not immediately terrified. There was something unsettling about it, of course. A tall, hooded figure standing silently beside the window should have scared me, but the feeling I had was more like curiosity mixed with disbelief. I was trying to make sense of it. Was it someone I knew? Was it a person in a costume? Was it somehow a stranger in our house? Why was it standing there so quietly? Why was it looking out the window? I remember looking at its robe and thinking it did not make sense. It seemed too thick and too old-fashioned. The way it stood did not make sense either. It was not looking around the room, not checking on my parents, not reacting to me waking up. It was just watching the light outside. Then it noticed me. I do not know exactly how. Maybe I shifted in the bed. Maybe I made a small sound. Maybe it sensed that I was awake. But after a few seconds, the figure slowly turned around, and I saw its face. That is the part I remember most clearly. It is also the hardest part to explain. The face looked almost human, but not quite. It had the basic shape of an elderly face. The skin was yellowish white, pale in a way that looked unhealthy, but not exactly dead. It had deep wrinkles, especially around the cheeks and forehead. The face looked old, older than any person I had ever seen at that age. But the features were wrong. Its eyes were huge, not wide in a normal way, but long and drooping, stretching downward as though the face had been pulled into a strange, sad shape. They reminded me, years later, of the eye holes in a Scream mask, except they were more human-looking. They were not empty black holes. There was something in them, but the eyes were too large, too long, and too deep set to feel natural. Its mouth was the same way. Long, open, drooping, it looked like the mouth of a Scream mask, except more human and more wrinkled. It was not screaming. It was not making a sound. It was just open in a long, heavy expression that I could not understand. At the time, I did not know whether it was angry, surprised, sad, or afraid. As I got older and thought about it more, I began to feel that it looked afraid. Not afraid in the same way I would have been afraid. Not panicked, not running, but startled, like it had not expected me to be awake, like it had been focused on something outside the window and suddenly realized it was not alone. It looked directly at me, and I looked directly at it. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. I remember that so clearly because it was not like a nightmare where everything is chaotic. There was no yelling, no sudden attack, no terrifying sound. The room was still quiet. My parents were still asleep on either side of me. The blinds continued to glow faintly with the first light of morning, and this thing was standing there, staring at me. I expected to feel terror, but I did not. I was confused, certainly. I knew something was wrong. I knew this was not a normal person standing in my parents' bedroom before sunrise. But the figure did not feel malicious. It did not feel like it wanted to harm me. It did not move toward my parents. It did not reach for me. It did not speak. It simply stared. There was something sad in its expression, something almost lost. I know that sounds strange, especially because the face itself was so disturbing. If I had seen the same face in a movie, I probably would have been terrified. It had all the features of something meant to scare someone. The huge, drooping eyes, the long, open mouth, the wrinkled, pale skin, the heavy hooded robe. But in the room, in that moment, I did not feel like it was there to frighten me. I felt like it had been caught, or perhaps like it did not understand where it was. After staring at me for what felt like a long time, it began to move. It did not walk normally. That is another thing I remember. It glided. It moved silently around the front of the bed, passing close enough that I could see the texture of the robe and the shape of its body beneath it. Its feet did not seem to make any sound on the floor. I do not remember seeing them clearly. It was as though the bottom of the robe moved just above the ground, or perhaps it moved so smoothly that my memory does not include footsteps. It went around the bed slowly. I stayed upright, watching it. I could have moved. That is why I do not think it was sleep paralysis. I was not trapped. I was not frozen. I was sitting up in bed. I could move my arms, I could turn my head. I could have spoken if I wanted to. But I did not. I was too focused on the figure. I watched it pass the foot of the bed and move toward the bedroom door. It never looked away from me completely. Its head turned slightly as it moved, as though it was still aware of where I was sitting. I remember its face in profile for a moment, the deep wrinkles, the pale skin, the strange open mouth, and the hood framing the head. Then it reached the door. It did not touch the handle. It did not open it in a normal way. It simply moved through the doorway and out of the room. The second it disappeared from sight, everything changed. The bedroom door slammed shut. Not slowly, not because of a draft. It shut with a hard, sudden force that made the whole room jump. At the same moment, the lights turned on. I do not remember anyone touching a switch. I only remember the room suddenly becoming bright. And both of my parents woke up at the exact same time. They shot awake like they had been startled by something terrible. They were breathing heavily. Not the way people normally wake up after a good night's sleep. They were gasping and breathing fast, almost as if they had both been pulled out of the same nightmare at the same moment. I remember looking from one of them to the other. I remember the room feeling different after the lights came on. The figure was gone. The window was just a window again. The bedroom door was closed. The room looked completely normal. But my parents looked frightened. At least, they looked startled and deeply unsettled for a few seconds. I do not remember exactly what they said. Maybe they asked what happened. Maybe they looked around the room. Maybe they only sat there trying to wake up fully. I did not tell them about the figure at the time. I do not know why. Maybe I was too young to put the experience into words. Maybe part of me thought they would not believe me. Maybe I was not frightened enough in the moment to feel the need to say anything. Or maybe I simply did not know what I had seen, and I could not explain it to anyone else if I tried. I only knew that something had been standing at the window. Something tall. Something in a brown hooded robe. Something with a strange old face. Something that seemed fascinated by the sunrise. And then it had looked at me, glided out of the room, and vanished just before the door slammed and my parents woke up. For years, I did not talk about it. The memory stayed with me, but it was difficult to describe. Every time I tried to explain the face, it sounded wrong. People would picture something different from what I saw. They would imagine a normal ghost, a monster, a demon, or a person in a mask. But none of those descriptions felt right. It was not exactly a human. It was not exactly an animal. It did not look like something from any story I had heard before. The closest description I have ever found is something like a demon, but even that does not feel accurate because of the way it behaved. It did not seem evil. It did not seem threatening. It did not seem interested in hurting anyone. It seemed confused. It seemed afraid. And it seemed interested in the sunrise. That last part is difficult for me to explain, but it is the feeling I have always had. It stood at the window with its hands folded behind its back, looking out through the blinds as the first light appeared. It was not staring into the room. It was not watching us sleep. It was looking outside. It seemed absorbed in the view. Maybe it was only the way I interpreted its posture. Maybe I am giving meaning to a strange memory because I do not know what else to do with it. But it looked like someone watching something beautiful for the first time, or someone trying to understand it. I have wondered many times whether it could have been a dream. That would be the easiest answer. I was a child. I had just woken up. The room was dim. The early morning light was strange. I was sleeping in my parents' bed, which may have made the whole experience feel more vivid or confusing. Maybe I was still dreaming when I sat up. Maybe I saw the shadow of curtains, furniture, or a coat hanging nearby, and my mind turned it into a figure. Maybe the sound of the door slamming and the lights turning on were real events that became mixed into a dream. Maybe my parents both woke up because of the door, and I connected that moment to something I had imagined. Those are possible explanations. Memory is not perfect. Childhood memory is especially difficult to trust because dreams can blend into real events. A terrifying or unusual dream can feel more real than a normal day. People can remember the feeling of something clearly while forgetting the context around it. But there are things about the experience that still make it feel different from a dream. I remember moving freely. I remember sitting up. I remember watching the figure from behind before it noticed me. I remember the texture of the robe. I remember the pale, yellowish white skin. I remember the wrinkles around its face. I remember its huge eyes and long drooping mouth. And I remember the way it moved around the bed, quietly and smoothly, before leaving the room. Most dreams change quickly. Locations shift. People become other people. You find yourself somewhere else without knowing how you got there. But this memory stayed in one room. The room I knew. The bed I was sleeping in. My parents beside me. The window with the blinds. The door. Everything remained consistent. That does not prove it was real, but it is why I have never been able to completely dismiss it. Then there is the fact that both of my parents woke up at the same time. They have no memory of the event. They do not remember the door slamming. They do not remember the lights turning on. They do not remember waking in panic. I never told them about it then, so they had no reason to connect their memory to mine. For them, it may have been only a brief bad dream or a normal moment of waking up. But for me, it was the ending of something I had watched happen in the room. It is possible that they both had nightmares at the same time. It is possible that the doors slammed because of air pressure or a draft, and the noise woke them. It is possible that the lights had been turned on by one of them in a half-asleep state, or that my memory added that detail later. There are plenty of possibilities. But none of them erase the feeling I had while looking at that figure. I have sometimes thought that maybe it was something that did not belong here. Not necessarily something evil. Not a demon sent to harm us. Not a dead person. Not a monster hiding in the dark. Maybe something that had somehow entered the wrong place. Maybe something from a different reality, a different plane, or some part of existence that I cannot understand. That is not a claim I can prove. It is only a thought that comes back to me because of how lost it seemed. It looked at me with those huge, strange eyes, and I did not feel hatred from it. I did not feel anger. I did not feel that it wanted anything from me. I felt that it was afraid, as if I had seen it when I was not supposed to, as if it had been standing there watching the light come into our world, fascinated by something completely ordinary to us. The sunrise. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe it was a dream created by early morning light, childhood imagination, and the strange feeling of waking up between my sleeping parents. Maybe the figure was only a shadow that my mind turned into a creature. Maybe every detail grew stronger over the years because I kept replaying it in my head. But it was real to me. That is the only thing I can say for certain. It felt more real than a dream. It felt more real than a story. I remember its face more clearly than I remember many people I knew as a child. I remember the sadness or fear in its expression. I remember it gliding around the bed. I remember the doors slamming shut after it left. And I remember my parents waking at the same time, breathing hard as though they had both been somewhere terrible in their sleep. I still do not feel afraid when I think about it. That surprises me because the image should be frightening. A tall, hooded figure with a wrinkled, pale face, huge, drooping eyes, and a long, open mouth would scare almost anyone. If I saw it in my bedroom now, as an adult, I do not know how I would react. But the child version of me did not feel like it was there to hurt us. I felt like it was just there, watching the sunrise. Then it saw me, and it left. My grandmother was basically my mother while I was growing up. My actual mom was very young when I was born, and because of that, my grandmother became the person who was there for so much of my childhood. She was not just someone I visited on holidays or called once in a while. She was part of everything. We spent time together constantly. She was there for the ordinary parts of my life, the little things people do not always remember until much later. She was someone I trusted completely. When I think about growing up, I do not only think about my parents, school, friends, and childhood homes. I think about her. I think about the routines we shared. I think about how familiar she was, how safe she felt, and how difficult it was for me to imagine a world where she was not there. So when she got sick, it changed everything. I was 18 by then, old enough to understand what was happening, but not old enough to know how to handle it. She became very ill and eventually went into hospice care at home. My aunt was caring for her, doing what she could to keep her comfortable and make sure she was not alone. The house became a different kind of place during that time. Hospice changes the feeling of a home. Ordinary rooms become quieter. Family members speak more softly. Everyone watches the person they love for small signs, whether they are sleeping, whether they are comfortable, whether they need water, whether they seem afraid, whether they recognize the people around them. It is not only sadness, it is waiting, a strange, heavy kind of waiting. My grandmother had become very weak. She had lost a lot of her ability to speak clearly, and most conversations had become difficult. Sometimes she could say something, but it would be hard to understand. Other times, she would try to communicate with her eyes, her hands, or the urgency in her voice. One night, my aunt remembered her begging for the window to be left open. She kept saying it was stuffy. It was not necessarily unusual. Sick people can feel overheated or uncomfortable. Rooms can feel too warm, especially when someone is lying in bed for long periods. But my grandmother was insistent about it. She wanted the window open. She seemed to need fresh air. My aunt opened it for her. Then, later that same night, my grandmother insisted on calling me. That was unusual enough to stand out. She had difficulty speaking by then, but she wanted to talk to me specifically. My aunt helped her make the call, and when I answered, I could hear that something was wrong immediately. My grandmother was trying to say something. I could hear her voice, but I could not understand the words. She sounded desperate, not angry, not confused in the ordinary way that happens when someone is sick. Desperate, like she was trying hard to tell me something important before she ran out of time. I kept asking her what she was saying. "Grandma, what is it? I can't understand you. Are you okay?" But I could not make out the words. The sound of her trying to speak made me uneasy. There was something in the way she was struggling that felt different. I knew she was sick. I knew she was tired. I knew the hospice situation meant that almost anything could happen, and that conversations could become difficult. Still, I had the feeling that she was trying to tell me something she did not want to leave unsaid. I remember feeling overwhelmed. I did not know what to do. I was 18. I loved her, but I did not know how to handle a conversation where someone I had always depended on was suddenly unable to communicate clearly. I did not know whether she was scared, in pain, confused, or trying to say goodbye. So I tried to comfort her. I told her, "It's okay, Grandma. I'm coming over tomorrow. We'll talk about it then." I meant it. I fully expected to see her the next day. I thought there would be time. That is one of the hardest things about losing someone. In the moment, you do not always know that a normal conversation is going to be the last one. You think there will be another visit, another morning, another chance to sit beside them, hold their hand, and say the things you are not sure how to say yet. That night, after the call, I tried to sleep. But I did not sleep well. At some point, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I woke in a sweat. I had been dreaming. Even now, the dream feels unreal to me. I cannot explain it properly, and I cannot say whether it was a dream about my grandmother, a dream about death, or simply one of those nightmares that leaves behind a heavy feeling even after the images are gone. I only remember waking suddenly. My body felt tense. My sheets were damp with sweat. The room was dark and quiet. For a few moments, I lay there trying to calm down. I remember feeling that something had happened, though I could not explain what. It was not a clear thought. It was just a strange, deep feeling that stayed in my chest. Eventually, I went back to sleep. When I woke up later that morning, my phone was full of messages. There were about 12 texts waiting for me. I knew before I opened them. Some part of me already knew. My grandmother had died in the night. The news hit me in a way I cannot completely describe. Even when you know someone is sick, even when they are in hospice, even when everyone is preparing themselves for the possibility, the moment it actually happens still feels impossible. There is a before and after. Before, the person is still somewhere in the world. You can call them. You can visit them. You can hope they will have a better day. Then suddenly, they are gone. I remember reading the messages and feeling numb. I thought about the call. I thought about how badly she had wanted to speak to me. I thought about the way I could not understand her. I thought about saying I would come over the next day. For a long time, I regretted not going to her that night. I replayed it in my mind again and again. I wondered whether I should have gotten in the car immediately. I wondered whether she had been trying to say goodbye. I wondered whether she had been afraid, whether she needed me, whether there was something she wanted me to know. But as I got older, I began to see it differently. I still wish I had gone. I probably always will. But I also know that she had her own moment. She had to make her peace in her own time. Maybe she had said what she could say. Maybe she had reached out because she wanted to hear my voice. Maybe the words themselves were not the most important part. Maybe what mattered was that I answered. Maybe what mattered was that I told her I loved her in the only way I knew how at the time, by promising I would come see her. I do not know. I will probably never know what she was trying to say, but I do not think she left believing she was alone. There have been other strange things in my life too, things I have never been able to make sense of. They are completely different from losing my grandmother, but they have left me with the same uncomfortable feeling that reality does not always behave the way we expect it to. One of the strangest things happened while I was driving. It happened on separate occasions, 3 times in total. I was relatively young each time, and it has not happened again in years. That fact is one of the only reasons I can talk about it now without feeling as panicked as I did then. The first time it happened, I was driving normally. I do not remember the exact road, but I remember being alert. I was not tired enough to think I had fallen asleep. I was not intoxicated. I was not doing anything unusual. I was simply driving, focused on the road ahead. Then my entire vision went white. Not blurry, not dim. White, for what felt like only a second, everything disappeared behind a bright blankness. It was as though someone had placed a sheet of white light directly in front of my eyes. I could not see the road, the lane lines, the cars, the trees, or anything around me. Then my vision came back. And when it did, I was much farther down the road, miles farther. That was the part that frightened me. I had not crashed. I had not drifted off the road. I had not hit another car. I had apparently continued driving accurately, staying on the road and getting farther along my route, but I had no memory of the distance in between. It felt as though time had skipped. One moment I was looking at the road. Then everything went white. Then I was somewhere else, still driving, with no idea how I had gotten there. At first I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had blinked longer than I realized. Maybe sunlight had hit the windshield at the perfect angle. Maybe I had become distracted and lost track of time. It is possible to drive on familiar roads and arrive somewhere without remembering every turn, especially if your mind is somewhere else. But this did not feel like ordinary distraction. The whiteout had been too complete, and the distance afterward was too much. The second time it happened, I was even more unsettled. Again, I was driving normally. Again, there was no warning. Then the world disappeared into white light. It lasted only a moment. Then I was farther down the road than I should have been, still moving safely, still in control of the vehicle, but unable to remember the missing stretch of time. This time, I knew it was not just a strange fluke. I remember checking myself afterward. I tried to make sure I was awake. I tried to focus on my breathing, the road, the steering wheel, the sound of the engine. I looked for any sign that something was wrong with the car or the weather. There was nothing obvious. No flashing lights, no collision, no damage, no reason I could point to. The third time happened in much the same way. The white came suddenly. The road vanished. Then I was miles ahead. Each time it seemed to last only a second from my point of view, but the distance I had covered suggested that more time must have passed than I remembered. That was what made it so unnerving. I have looked into possible explanations over the years. Some things I read suggested neurological causes, including brief seizures or altered awareness episodes. Other possible explanations could include extreme fatigue, dissociation, visual disturbances, migraines, momentary loss of awareness, or things I do not understand well enough to name. But none of the explanations I found fully made sense to me. If I had been unaware, how had I kept driving safely? If I had been unable to see, how had I stayed on the road? If I had lost time, why had I not crashed, drifted, missed a turn, or done something obviously dangerous? I do not know. Maybe I was not truly unconscious. Maybe I was functioning on some kind of automatic awareness that allowed me to continue driving while my conscious memory was absent. Maybe the road was straight, empty, and forgiving enough that I simply did not realize what happened. Maybe the entire experience lasted less time than it felt like, and the distance only seemed impossible because I was frightened. Maybe sunlight, exhaustion, or something physical created a brief event that my mind interpreted as a blank gap. I cannot say. What I know is that it happened 3 times. Each time I was young. Each time my vision went completely white for what felt like a second. Each time I found myself much farther down the road with no clear memory of the distance in between. And then it stopped. It has not happened since. There is a part of me that is grateful it ended, because I do not know what I would have done if it continued. It is not something I would ever want to experience again. The idea that your body might continue moving through the world while your conscious mind loses track of time is deeply unsettling. It makes you question how much of your life you are actually aware of from moment to moment. I do not connect those driving incidents directly to my grandmother's death or to anything spiritual. They happened at different times in my life, under completely different circumstances. I do not have a theory that ties them together, but both experiences left me with the same feeling. There are moments when reality seems to slip just slightly out of reach. You can be standing in a room, listening to the voice of someone you love as they struggle to say something you cannot understand. Then you wake in the middle of the night from a dream that feels too heavy to be ordinary, only to learn hours later that they died around that same time. Or you can be driving down a road, fully awake, and suddenly lose the road completely behind a wall of white light, only to return miles later with no memory of the space in between. Neither experience gave me answers. Neither event made me certain about ghosts, heaven, fate, seizures, dreams, alternate realities, or any other explanation people might offer. But they made me less certain that we understand everything that happens to us. My grandmother's death is still the one that stays closest to my heart. Not because I think I had some supernatural warning, not because I believe she came to me in a dream, not because I think the open window, the strange phone call, and the 4 a.m. waking prove anything beyond doubt, but because I loved her, because she was so much more than a grandmother to me. Because when she was trying to speak, I could hear that she was reaching for me. And because I did not understand until the next morning that I would never get another chance to ask her what she meant. I still carry regret about that night. But I also carry love, and I carry the belief that she knew I was coming. Maybe not literally the next day, because she had already left by then. But I think she knew I loved her. I think she knew I wanted to see her. I think she knew she was not forgotten. As for the driving incidents, I do not have peace with them in the same way. They are still a question mark. They are still 3 moments of white light, missing distance, and uncertainty. But they are also a reminder that some things are worth taking seriously, even when you cannot explain them. Because sometimes the scariest experiences are not the ones where you see a monster or hear a voice in an empty room. Sometimes it is realizing that something happened to you, that you were there for it, and that you still cannot explain how you got from one moment to the next. The most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me was not frightening at first. That is what makes it so strange. It did not happen in the middle of the night. There were no voices, no shadows in the hallway, no doors slamming, no strange sounds coming from an empty room. Nothing about it felt threatening. In fact, the whole day had started out warm, ordinary, and happy. My wife and I were setting up our Christmas tree in our new home. It was about 4 years ago, not long after we had moved in. The house was still new enough to us that some rooms had not fully become ours yet. We were still learning where things fit, which closets were best for storage, how the house sounded at night, and where all the boxes from the move had ended up. But it was Christmas season, and putting up the tree was one of the first things that made the house feel like home. We had brought out the box with the decorations. It had all the usual things inside: lights, ornaments, hooks, garland, maybe a few decorations that had been packed away so long we had forgotten about them. The tree was already standing in the living room, and we were working through the normal process of setting everything up. The lights went on first, then the ornaments, then all the smaller decorations that make a tree look finished. The living room slowly changed from an ordinary room into a Christmas room. The tree lights gave everything a warm glow. Decorations came out of the box one at a time. We probably joked about old ornaments, remembered where certain ones came from, and tried to find the right places for them. It was one of those simple moments that people do not usually think much about until years later. The only thing missing was the red tree skirt. It was large, bright red, and impossible to mistake for anything else. Not a tiny ornament that could have fallen behind a box or disappeared under wrapping paper. It was one of the main pieces of the Christmas setup, the kind of thing you expect to find right away when you open the decorations. At first, neither of us worried about it. We assumed it was somewhere in the box. Maybe it was folded under the ornaments. Maybe it had been put inside another bag. Maybe it was mixed in with the lights or shoved under some tissue paper. The tree was still being decorated, so we kept going. We thought we would find it eventually. But once everything else was set up, it became obvious that the tree skirt was not in the box. We checked again. Then we checked more carefully. We took things out. We looked beneath everything. We made sure it was not stuck to the bottom of the box or folded into some other decoration. Nothing. The tree was finished, except for the red skirt that was supposed to sit around its base. At that point, we began looking around the house. At first, it was still casual. We checked the living room. Maybe it had been put down while we were unpacking. Maybe it had fallen behind the couch. Maybe we had brought it into the room earlier and forgotten where we placed it. But it was not there. So we checked the basement. The basement still had boxes and storage items from the move. It was exactly the kind of place where something seasonal could have ended up by mistake. We looked through the areas where Christmas decorations might have been stored. We checked corners, shelves, piles of boxes, and any place where a large folded red tree skirt could have been placed. Nothing. Then we checked the attic. Again, nothing. We checked the garage. Nothing. We checked closets. Nothing. We checked rooms that made no sense to check. The kitchen, the bedrooms, the laundry area, the hallway closets. Every place in the house where it could possibly have been set down, packed away, shoved into a box, or accidentally mixed in with something else. We searched for probably an hour, maybe longer. The thing about looking for a missing object is that eventually you stop searching logically and start searching desperately. You begin opening cabinets that could not possibly hold it. You start checking the same room twice because maybe your eyes skipped over it the first time. You look under furniture. You check behind doors. You pick up bags you already looked through. The more you search, the more impossible it feels that the object is not there. The tree skirt was not small. It was bright red. It would have stood out in almost any room, and we could not find it anywhere. Eventually, we gave up. There was nothing else to do. The tree looked fine without it. It was not the end of the world. We could buy another one later. We could keep looking another day. Maybe it would turn up when we unpacked another box or cleaned out some storage space. My wife went upstairs to take a nap. I was tired too. Searching the whole house had become strangely exhausting, even though it was such a small problem. There is something mentally draining about looking everywhere for an object that should obviously be nearby, but is not. I remember taking one last look around the living room. The tree stood there, fully decorated. The lights were on. The ornaments were in place. The floor around the base of the tree was bare. No red tree skirt. No folded fabric. No bag. Nothing. I remember admitting defeat. Not in a dramatic way. Just one of those moments where you tell yourself, fine, it is gone. We will deal with it later. I filled up my water bottle before going upstairs. That detail has stayed with me because it means I was fully awake and moving through the house normally. I remember standing in the kitchen, filling the bottle, probably looking toward the living room again without really thinking about it. The tree skirt was still not there. Then I went upstairs to join my wife. We were upstairs for about 45 minutes. Neither of us really slept. We had intended to nap, but it was one of those times where you lie down because you are tired, then end up just resting without falling asleep. Maybe we talked a little. Maybe we looked at our phones. Maybe we just laid there quietly. But we were both upstairs. The only other living thing in the house was our dog. No visitors came over. No friends had keys. No relatives stopped by. No one was supposed to be inside. The front door was locked. The house was quiet. At some point, I got up. I remember walking toward the stairs. The staircase overlooked part of the living room below, so when you started walking down, You could see the area around the Christmas tree from above. I took 3 steps down. Then I looked into the living room, and there it was, the red tree skirt. It was neatly folded on the rug directly in front of the tree. For a second, I did not understand what I was seeing. My brain rejected it. I knew the tree skirt was missing. I had searched for it. My wife had searched for it. We had checked the entire house. I had taken one final look around the living room before going upstairs. I had filled my water bottle, walked through the house, and accepted that it was gone. Then, less than an hour later, it was sitting in the most obvious place possible. Not hidden behind the tree, not shoved under a box, not lying crumpled in the corner. It was neatly folded on the rug right in front of the tree. Bright red, impossible to miss. I froze on the stairs. I remember feeling completely dumbfounded. Not scared, not exactly. Just unable to make reality fit the thing I was looking at. There are times when you see something strange and your body reacts before you understand it. You jump, you run, your heart starts racing. This was different. I just stared. The red tree skirt was there. It was the same one we had been searching for. There was no doubt about it. I practically screamed for my wife to come downstairs. I do not remember exactly what I yelled. Probably her name first. Then something like, "You need to come see this," or "The tree skirt is here," or "How did this get here?" I needed another person to look at it. I needed to know I was not losing my mind. I needed her to confirm that I had not somehow imagined the entire hour-long search. My wife came downstairs. She saw it too. The same bright red tree skirt neatly folded in front of the tree. For a few seconds, neither of us knew what to say. We both knew where it should have been. We both knew it had not been there. We both knew we had looked everywhere for it. We went over to it. We picked it up. It was real. It was normal fabric. It was not wet, damaged, torn, or strange in any visible way. It did not feel unusually cold or warm. There was no note attached to it. Nothing else appeared with it. It was simply the tree skirt, the missing Christmas decoration, the one item we could not find, and it was sitting in the exact spot where we would have expected it to be all along. So we put it around the bottom of the tree. That was it. No huge dramatic ending, no second strange event, no sound in the room, no lights flickering, no shadow moving behind us. We placed the tree skirt around the base of the tree, finished the setup, and continued with our day. But neither of us forgot it. We have talked about it many times since then, trying to come up with an explanation. The most obvious answer is that one of us brought it into the living room and forgot. Maybe one of us found it during the search, placed it on the rug, and did not remember doing so. Maybe exhaustion or distraction made us both overlook it. Maybe it had been in the room the whole time, but hidden behind something, and we somehow failed to notice it until later. But that explanation does not feel right. The room was not crowded. The tree skirt was bright red. We had searched the living room multiple times. It was a large object, neatly folded, sitting on a rug directly in front of the tree. There was no way either of us could have casually walked past it. And if one of us had found it, why would we have gone upstairs still thinking it was missing? Why would we have searched the basement, attic, garage, and every other part of the house for an hour? Why would we have accepted defeat? Another explanation is that the dog moved it. But our dog could not have folded it neatly. The tree skirt was not dragged in from another room. It was not crumpled or chewed. It was not bunched up beneath furniture. It was folded cleanly and placed in front of the tree like someone had set it there on purpose. The dog was not capable of that. Could someone have entered the house? That thought crossed my mind too, but there was no reason to believe anyone had. The doors were locked, No windows were open. There was no sign of anything else being disturbed. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been moved except the tree skirt, and if someone had entered the house while we were upstairs, why would they take a Christmas tree skirt from some unknown location, fold it, place it in front of the tree, and leave without taking anything? It makes no sense. We lived alone. There were no kids in the house, no roommates, no family member hiding upstairs, no one who could have been playing a prank. No one had access that we knew of. It happened once, only once. Nothing like it had ever happened to either of us before, and nothing like it has happened since. That is another reason the memory has stayed so strong. If strange things had happened all the time, maybe we would have blamed the house. Maybe we would have started watching for patterns. Maybe we would have looked into the previous owners or wondered whether the place had some history. But this was the only event. Before it, the house had been completely normal. After it, the house remained completely normal. The Christmas tree skirt never disappeared again. No other decoration showed up in the wrong place. No objects moved on their own. No one heard footsteps at night. There were no strange noises from the attic or basement. Just that one afternoon. I think the timing made it feel more impossible. Christmas decorations are things you handle deliberately. You take them out once a year. You know what should be in the box. You know what is missing. The tree skirt was part of the setup. It was not something sitting around every day that could easily be misplaced. We had unpacked the Christmas box together. We had set up the tree together. We had both noticed that the tree skirt was absent. We had both searched for it. Then we had both gone upstairs. And when I came back down, it had appeared. I am not religious. I do not consider myself someone who sees signs everywhere. I do not automatically believe that every strange experience is a message from someone beyond this life. I do not have a theory about ghosts, spirits, glitches, alternate dimensions, or anything else that might explain it. But that incident changed something in me. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way. I did not suddenly become afraid of my own house. I did not start researching paranormal stories or checking every room before bed, but it made me less certain that reality is always as simple as we assume. Most of the time, life follows rules. You put something in a box, and it stays in the box. You lose an object, and it is somewhere you forgot to look. You search a house, and if an item is not there, it is not there. A folded red tree skirt does not vanish from a Christmas decoration box, remain missing through an hour-long search of an entire house, then appear neatly placed in front of the tree while two adults are upstairs. That is not supposed to happen. And yet, it did. I can still picture the moment clearly. I can see the staircase. I can see the top few steps beneath my feet. I can see the living room below. I can see the tree lights glowing softly in the dim room. And there, right in front of the tree, I can see that bright red tree skirt folded neatly on the rug. The sight was so ordinary that it became extraordinary. If it had appeared floating in the air, maybe I would have been terrified. If it had fallen from the ceiling, maybe I would have screamed. If we had heard a voice or seen a person standing near the tree, maybe I would have had a story that sounded more obviously paranormal. But it was just a tree skirt, a simple Christmas decoration. It was missing, then it was not. That was all. But sometimes the smallest things are the hardest to explain. I still do not know whether we both somehow overlooked it, whether memory played a trick on us, whether there was an ordinary explanation we never found, or whether something genuinely impossible happened in that living room. All I know is that my wife saw it too. She remembers searching. She remembers giving up. She remembers going upstairs. And she remembers coming downstairs after I yelled for her, and seeing the red tree skirt sitting right in front of the tree. We set it up. We left it there. Christmas continued. And nothing like that has ever happened again. But every year when we pull out the decorations, I think about that day. I think about the empty box, the basement, the attic, the garage, the hour of searching, the last look around the living room, the water bottle, the 45 minutes upstairs, then 3 steps down the stairs and something impossible waiting in plain sight. I do not know what it means. I do not know whether it means anything at all, but I am convinced there are parts of reality we do not understand yet. Because once, in a quiet house with only my wife and our dog inside, a missing red Christmas tree skirt appeared neatly folded in front of a tree after both of us had searched everywhere it could possibly have been. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, I lived near a stretch of ancient woodland in the UK. It was the kind of woodland that seemed to have always been there. The trees were old, the ground was uneven, and the paths changed depending on the season. In autumn, the floor was covered in wet leaves that made everything look brown and gold. In winter, the branches were bare and tangled against the sky. In summer, the whole place became thick, green, and difficult to see through once you stepped away from the main tracks. For me and the other kids in the area, it was more than just woods. It was where we played. We built dens from fallen branches. We dared each other to walk down darker paths. We looked for foxes, birds, strange insects, old bottles, broken pieces of metal, anything that made us feel like we had discovered something hidden. We played manhunt, hide and seek, tag, and all the usual games children play when they have access to somewhere large enough that adults cannot see every corner of it. I knew those woods well. At least I thought I did. I had spent most of my childhood in and around them. I knew the places where the ground turned muddy after rain. I knew which trees were easiest to climb. I knew where the brambles were thick enough to tear your clothes. I knew which paths led toward the fields, which ones led back toward the houses, and which ones adults told us not to use because they were too far from the main trail. There were stories about the woods, too. Every place like that has stories. Some were probably made up by older children to scare younger ones. Some came from parents or grandparents. Some were things people claimed they had heard from someone else without ever knowing where the story began. The biggest local story was about something called the Witch's Circle. People said you were supposed to avoid it. The story changed depending on who told it. Some people said it was a clearing deep in the woods where witches had once gathered. Others said it was a place where animals acted strange. Some said you could get lost if you wandered into it. A few people claimed that bad things happened to anyone who touched something inside it. As a kid, I did not fully believe any of it. I was not especially brave, but I was skeptical. The woods were old. People made up stories about old woods. That was how I saw it. There were strange-looking trees, thick, foggy mornings, animal noises at night, and the occasional abandoned object someone had dragged in. It was easy for people to turn ordinary things into legends. I had heard about the Witch's Circle for years, but I had never seen it. None of my friends had seen it either, at least not in a way they could prove. Some claimed they knew where it was. Some said their older brother had found it. Some said their cousin had gone there and come back shaking. But whenever anyone tried to describe where it actually was, the directions became useless. It's past the big oak. It's near the stream. It's behind the fallen tree. It's past the bramble patch. That did not narrow it down much. There were big oaks everywhere. There were several streams or muddy ditches depending on the time of year. Fallen trees were common, and brambles covered half the woodland. So I assumed the witch's circle was either a made-up story or some ordinary clearing that people had turned into something scary. Then one day, while playing Manhunt, I found something that made me question that. There were several of us playing that afternoon. I do not remember exactly how many, maybe 4 or 5, maybe more. We had divided into seekers and hiders, and I was trying to find somewhere no one would think to look. Manhunt in those woods was serious business. If you hid behind the obvious trees or stayed close to the trails, someone would find you quickly. The best hiding places were the uncomfortable ones, thick patches of bramble, low areas behind fallen trunks, dense bushes where you had to crawl inside, or small gaps between trees where you could stand completely still. I remember running away from the others, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and wherever they had started counting. The woods were thick that day. There were holly bushes and evergreen growth along some areas, dark green and dense enough that they looked like walls. They were the kind of bushes that scratched your arms and caught on your clothes when you pushed through them. Most kids would avoid going inside them because it was uncomfortable and you could easily get stuck. But I was trying to hide, so I found a large holly bush, or perhaps some kind of dense evergreen tree with low branches, and decided to push through it. I remember the leaves scraping against me. I remember ducking my head and forcing my way through the branches. It was darker inside the bush than I expected. The leaves and twigs closed around me. For a moment, I thought I had made a mistake. I thought I would have to back out because there was nowhere to go. Then I stepped through the other side, and I found myself standing in a clearing. It was almost perfectly circular. At least it seemed that way to me. The clearing was not huge. I would guess it was around 10 meters by 10 meters, maybe a little smaller or larger, but it had a clear circular shape. It looked as though the woods had opened up around a single empty space. The first thing I noticed was the ground. Everywhere outside the clearing, the woodland looked normal. Green leaves, living plants, thick undergrowth, brown earth, moss, and the usual mess of branches and old leaves. But inside the circle, the ground was covered in dead leaves, not freshly fallen autumn leaves. These looked dry, dark, and old, as though they had been sitting there for a long time. The clearing seemed lifeless compared with the trees surrounding it. It was not completely bare, but it had a dead, abandoned quality to it. Then I looked at the trees. There were a few trees around the edge of the clearing. But they were wrong. They were not completely dead in the way a tree sometimes falls apart or rots away. They still had trunks and branches. But they looked barren. Their branches had no leaves, no twigs sprouting fresh growth, no living green anywhere on them, just trunks and long, empty branches. And then I saw what was on the branches. Animal skulls. Bones. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. My brain tried to make them into leaves or nests or bits of pale wood caught in the branches. But as I stared, I realized they were skulls. Small animal skulls. Some appeared to be hanging from branches, others were balanced on top of them. There were bones hooked over the limbs of the trees too, not 1 or 2. Enough that it looked deliberate. The branches were decorated with them. That is the only word that fits. The skulls and bones were placed, hooked, or perched around the trees as though someone had arranged them. Some were higher up, some were lower. Some looked like they had been tied with string, though I cannot say for sure because I was far away and terrified. I remember seeing pale bone against dark branches. I remember the strange empty trees. I remember the dead leaves covering the ground. And I remember realizing that this looked exactly like the kind of place people meant when they talked about the witch's circle. I froze. For a few seconds, I forgot I was playing a game. I forgot the other kids were somewhere in the woods calling for each other. I forgot I had crawled through the holly bush to hide. Everything outside the clearing seemed far away. The circle felt quiet. Not ordinary quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get in a woodland when nobody is talking. It felt like the sounds had been pushed back. I could still hear something faint beyond the trees. Maybe birds, maybe kids shouting in the distance, maybe wind in the leaves. But inside that clearing, all of it seemed muffled. I did not want to step farther in. I stood near the edge, close to the place where I had come through the holly bush. I remember feeling that I should leave immediately. Not because I had seen something move. Nothing moved. Not because I heard a voice. There was no voice. But every part of me felt like I was not supposed to be there. I do not know how long I stared. Probably only a few seconds. Then I pushed back through the holly bush as fast as I could. I did not care about hiding anymore. I did not care if the other kids saw me. I ran. I found my friends and told them what I had seen. Of course, nobody believed me. That is what happens when you are 8 or 9 and you come running out of the woods saying you found a secret circle full of bones. They thought I was trying to scare them. They laughed. They asked where it was. Some of them probably thought I had made up the story because I had been caught hiding or because I wanted attention. I told them I could take them there. I was certain I could find the holly bush again. I knew I had only run a short distance. I had gone off the path, pushed through the thick greenery, and found the clearing. It should have been easy to retrace my steps, but when we went back, I could not find it. We looked for the bush. We looked for the spot where I had pushed through. We searched the area I thought I had come from. Nothing. There were plenty of holly bushes and thick evergreen patches, but none of them opened into the clearing I had seen. We spent a while looking, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. I became more and more frustrated because I knew what I had seen. I knew I had not imagined it, but I could not lead them back there. Eventually, the others got bored. They started joking about it. Someone probably said I had gone into the wrong bit of woods. Someone else said it was probably just a pile of rubbish or an animal skeleton. But I knew it had been more than that. The trees had been covered in skulls and bones. The ground had looked dead. The clearing had been circular. And it had felt hidden. After that day, I actively searched for it again with friends. Not constantly, but enough that it became a small obsession. Whenever we were near that part of the woodland, I would look for the same kind of holly bush. I would search for gaps in the trees. I would look for a sudden break in the undergrowth. I would imagine that I had gone slightly too far, left or right, the first time. But I never found it. Years passed. I got older. The woods became less magical and more ordinary in some ways. You grow up and you start seeing places differently. What used to feel endless becomes smaller. Paths you thought were dangerous become familiar. The stories you heard as a child begin to sound like stories. But I never completely forgot the clearing. Then, a few years later, I found it again. It was not planned. I was not on some serious search. I was just in the woods, moving through an area I had been through before. I do not remember what I was doing that day. Maybe walking, maybe cutting through the woodland, maybe looking around with friends before we separated. But at some point, I was alone, and I came across it again. This time, it was summer. That made the experience worse. In autumn or winter, a dead-looking clearing might not stand out as much. Bare branches and dry leaves could blend into the season. But in summer, the entire woodland was alive. Everything outside was green. The trees were full. The undergrowth was thick. The sunlight filtered through leaves in bright patches. The air smelled of grass, damp soil, plants, and warm bark. Then suddenly, After moving through all that lush green growth, I found the clearing again. The change was immediate. It felt like stepping through a doorway. One moment, I was surrounded by living woodland. The next, I was standing at the edge of the same dead-looking circle. The ground was still covered in old leaves. The trees were still bare. The branches were still decorated with skulls and bones. I remember standing there alone and feeling a cold rush move through me. It was not physically cold outside, it was summer. But seeing that barren circle in the middle of a full green woodland made it feel completely wrong. It did not belong. The trees around it were alive. The trees inside it were not. I recognized the place instantly. The shape of the clearing, the dead leaves, the strange barren branches, the skulls. This time, I did not run away right away. I was older, still scared, but old enough to understand that if I wanted anyone to believe me, I needed proof. So I stepped closer. Every instinct told me not to. But I kept moving. I walked toward one of the trees where a skull was sitting on a lower branch. I do not remember exactly what kind of skull it was. It was small, maybe from a bird, rabbit, fox, or some other animal. I was not an expert in identifying bones, especially at that age. I only knew it was real. It was pale and weathered. It had empty eye sockets. It sat on the branch in a way that seemed intentional. I reached up and took it. I remember holding it in my hand. It was light, dry, real for the first time. I had evidence. Not a photograph, not a video, but something physical I could show people. I remember leaving the clearing with the skull and feeling relieved. I thought, finally, people will believe me. I had spent years being told the witch's circle was something I imagined. Now I had proof that at least some part of the story was real. I took it back to my friends. And once again, they did not believe me. They believed I had found an animal skull somewhere in the woods. That was easy enough to accept. Animal bones can be found in woodland. Foxes, birds, rabbits, deer, and other creatures die there. Hunters or scavengers may leave bones behind. Kids may find things and move them around. But they did not believe the clearing existed. They did not believe I had found a circle of dead trees with skulls and bones hung across the branches. They did not believe I had found the witch's circle. And honestly, I understand why. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something a child would invent after hearing a local legend. It sounds like the kind of story that becomes bigger every time it is told. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Maybe someone had arranged the bones. Maybe it was a private ritual site, an art project, a prank, a hunting display, or something connected to people who spent time in the woods. Maybe the trees were diseased or damaged in a way that prevented them from growing leaves. Maybe the dead ground was simply a clearing where little sunlight reached. Maybe the bones were collected by someone with an interest in animal remains and placed there for reasons I could not understand. Maybe it was connected to some religious or spiritual practice. At one point, I asked online whether it sounded like someone's ritual or religious thing. Someone replied that it sounded a little like something people might associate with Wicca, but that it did not really match a Wiccan ritual. That did not help much. It only made the place feel stranger. I did not need it to be witches. I did not need it to be supernatural. But I wanted to know why anyone would create something like that in the middle of ancient woodland. Why make a circle of bones? Why hang skulls from barren branches? Why place them where children from the local area might eventually find them? And why was the clearing so difficult to locate when I knew I had been there twice? The first time, I could not find it again even minutes later. The second time, I found it years afterward by accident. I never found it a third time. That is the part that still bothers me most. The woods were not endless. They were large, but not impossible to explore. I had spent years there. I knew the trails and the edges. I knew the common hiding places and the places people avoided. But that clearing never stayed where it should have been. It felt hidden. Not hidden because someone built a fence around it or marked the entrance. Hidden because the woodland seemed to swallow it. You could push through one patch of holly and find it, then try to return and find nothing but more holly. You could search for the exact trees and never see them again. Maybe I was simply bad at navigation. That is possible. Woods can be confusing, especially when you are young. A few turns through thick growth can make one area look exactly like another. You may think you are standing 50 meters from where you started when you are actually much farther away. Trees and bushes repeat themselves. Every path looks familiar. Maybe I only believed the clearing was difficult to find because I had been scared. Fear can distort memory. It can make a small clearing feel huge, a short distance feel long, and ordinary objects feel unnatural. But even now, the image remains clear. The dead leaves, the barren trees, the skulls and bones, the bright summer woodland around it, and that sudden feeling of stepping from a living place into somewhere that looked abandoned by life itself. I do not know what the witch's circle really was. Maybe it was a local prank that lasted for years. Maybe someone had a private ritual site there. Maybe it was the work of people collecting bones. Maybe it had nothing to do with witches at all. But I know I found it twice. And I know that when I tried to find it with other people, it vanished back into the woodland as though it had never been there. That ancient woodland had plenty of ordinary places. Places where we laughed, argued, hid from one another, built forts, and went home muddy before dinner. But somewhere inside it, there was also a small circle of dead leaves and bare trees. A circle that locals warned children about. A circle that was filled with skulls and bones. A circle I could never quite find when I wanted to. And even now, years later, I cannot decide whether I found an old local legend, someone's strange private project, or something I was never supposed to stumble into at all. Before the next witness speaks, take a second to subscribe to the Blackout Witness. New stories are shared here for the quiet hours, when the house is dark, the phone is face down, and every small sound feels louder than it should. A like and a comment help the channel reach more people who enjoy real stories with no easy answers. Now, let's go back to the night everything went dark. Have you ever seen Stir of Echoes? I am not a huge horror movie person. I have watched some over the years, but horror has never been my main genre. I do not go looking for the scariest films I can find, and I have never been someone who enjoys being frightened just for the sake of it. But I saw Stir of Echoes once, and it stayed with me. It came out around the same time as The Sixth Sense, or at least close enough that people always compared the two. Whenever someone brought up The Sixth Sense, I would usually tell them they should watch Stir of Echoes too. I always thought it was scarier, not because it had bigger scares or because it was a more famous movie, but because of the idea behind it. The story felt uncomfortably possible, at least in the way that good horror can feel possible. As I remember it, Kevin Bacon played the main character. He was skeptical, practical, and narrow-minded about anything spiritual or supernatural. He was the kind of person who dismissed those things before anyone could even explain them. He did not believe in spirits, other worlds, psychic experiences, or anything beyond what he could see and touch. Then, his sister-in-law, who was more mystical and open-minded, hypnotized him. It was not supposed to be some huge ritual. She did not tell him to summon anything or contact the dead. She simply suggested that he become more open, more receptive, less closed off to the parts of life he had spent years refusing to consider. Then he came out of the trance. And after that, things started happening. He began seeing things he could not explain. His mind had been opened, and suddenly he could see something that had been there all along. Or maybe it was something that had been waiting for him to notice it. That idea got under my skin. Not necessarily the ghosts or the movie itself. It was the thought that maybe some people do not see certain things because they are closed off to them. Maybe reality has layers, and most of us move through life with the doors locked, the curtains shut, and the lights on because we do not want to know what might be standing in the next room. I used to joke about it after watching the movie. I would tell people that being too open-minded sounded dangerous. I would say that if you started asking questions, you might get answers you were not prepared for. You might end up like Kevin Bacon in the movie, losing your mind because you had seen something that could not be unseen. At the time, it was just a movie thought, a creepy idea, the kind of thing you think about while lying in bed after watching a film, then laugh off the next day. But later in life, I went through a phase where those questions became more personal. I started thinking about faith, about whether there was anything after this life, about whether people were only matter, memory, chemistry, and time, whether we were born, lived, died, and then simply disappeared, whether all the things people believe in, souls, heaven, spirits, signs, fate, were only stories we told ourselves because the alternative was too empty. I do not think I was having some dramatic breakdown. I was just questioning things. Maybe everyone does at some point. You get older, and the beliefs you inherited from childhood start feeling less automatic. You begin examining them. You wonder what you actually believe and what you were only taught to repeat. You wonder whether life has meaning beyond the meaning we create for ourselves. You wonder what happens when the people you love are gone. You wonder whether there is anyone listening when you speak into the silence. For a while, those questions sat heavily with me. I was not necessarily religious. I did not have a clear set of answers. I was not looking to join a church or suddenly become deeply spiritual. I just wanted something. Some sign that there was more than this. Something beyond the visible, measurable world. I remember reaching out in my own way. I cannot remember whether it was prayer or meditation. It may have been a mixture of both. I may have just been sitting quietly, thinking, asking, hoping. I do not remember the exact words I used, but I remember the feeling behind them. I asked the universe for some kind of sign, not a huge miracle, not a burning bush, not a voice from the sky, just something that would make me feel less certain that everything ended when we died. Something that would suggest there was another side to life, or another layer to reality, or some part of existence that we had not figured out yet. I remember sitting there and waiting, and nothing happened. No sudden warmth, no unusual feeling, no sign, no answer. Eventually, I moved on. That is what usually happens when you ask for something from the universe. You wait for a while, then life continues. You make dinner, you go to work, you answer messages, you watch something on television. You forget the question because no answer ever comes. Days passed, maybe weeks. I cannot remember exactly how long it was. Long enough that the moment of asking had faded into the background. I was not sitting around expecting something to happen. I was not checking every shadow for a message or treating every coincidence like proof. I had gone back to normal life. Then one night, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Everyone else had gone to bed. It was late enough that the normal sounds of the day had stopped. No conversation in other rooms, no television, no doors opening or closing, just the low hum of the refrigerator, the occasional small sound a house makes when it settles, and the quiet click of keys as I used my laptop. I remember the kitchen clearly. The laptop was open in front of me. The table was mostly clear. The overhead light was on, or perhaps a small kitchen light nearby. The room was bright enough that I could see everything normally. There were no strange shadows, no flickering light, no storm outside, no wind moving through the house. The oven was across from where I was sitting. A kitchen towel was hanging from it. It was one of those ordinary towels people keep on the oven handle. It was not special, not a decoration anyone would notice twice. Just a towel hanging down naturally from the handle, folded over itself. I had seen it there countless times. I was sitting there doing whatever I was doing on the laptop when I got a feeling. It was subtle at first. Not fear, not a voice, not a sudden drop in temperature. Just that strange instinct people sometimes get when they are alone and something makes them look up. I do not know what caused it. Maybe I heard a tiny sound. Maybe the corner of my eye caught some movement. Maybe I simply became aware of the room in a different way. But I looked toward the oven, and I saw the towel move. At first, I thought it had been caught by air. That was the immediate explanation my brain reached for. A draft, air conditioning, air from a vent. Maybe the house settling had created a small movement. Maybe the towel was not hanging securely and had shifted, but it did not move like that. The towel was grabbed. That is the only way I know how to describe it. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out, taken hold of the bottom of the towel, and lifted it upward. The towel swung up to a 90-degree angle. It rose until it was parallel with the floor, not fluttering, not lifting gently from a breeze, not pushed halfway up and then falling back down. It went straight out. The bottom of the towel pointed away from the oven, held in the air like something was gripping it. For a second it stayed there. I just stared. My mind stopped working properly. I remember seeing the towel held out in front of the oven and feeling completely blank. Not screaming, not running, not even afraid in the way I expected I would be. I was dumbfounded because there was no wind, no air conditioning blowing through the kitchen, no open window, no fan, no one else awake, no person standing near the oven, nothing. Then the towel swung back down. It returned to where it had been hanging. Just like that. It dropped back into place as though nothing had happened. The kitchen was silent again. I kept staring at it. I do not know how long I sat there without moving. It may have been only a few seconds, but it felt longer. I remember looking from the towel to the rest of the room, checking whether there was any obvious explanation. The windows were closed, the air was still, the oven was normal, the towel was hanging naturally. Nothing else moved. But I knew what I had seen. It had not been a vague shift in the fabric. It had not been the bottom edge lifting a little. I watched the entire towel rise and hold itself out at a right angle from the oven. There was no one there to touch it. That was the moment Stir of Echoes came back to me. The movie. The hypnosis. The idea of being too open. The idea of asking for a sign and then realizing, too late, that maybe something had heard you. I remember thinking very clearly, be careful what you ask for. That phrase went through my mind immediately. Not because I believed I had summoned a ghost into my kitchen. I did not suddenly decide there was some creature standing beside the oven. But I remembered the feeling from the movie. The fear of opening a door you cannot close again. I remember thinking that I did not want to become like Kevin Bacon. I did not want to start seeing things everywhere. I did not want to spend the rest of my life questioning every sound in the house, or every movement in the corner of a room. I did not want to become so obsessed with finding meaning in strange events that I stopped being able to live normally. I did not want to go crazy trying to understand something I could not prove. So I did something that may sound strange, but it felt necessary at the time. I shut the door in my mind. I decided very firmly that I did not want more. I did not want another sign. I did not want to become more open. I did not want to see what else might be out there, if there was anything out there at all. Whatever had happened with the towel, I had seen enough. I remember sitting at that kitchen table and almost mentally saying, "No, that is enough. I do not want this." Then I went on with my life. Nothing else happened. No more moving towels, no footsteps, no lights turning on, no voices, no strange figures, no second sign. That moment was the only thing like it I have ever experienced. And maybe that is why it remains so powerful in my mind. If it had happened repeatedly, I might have found an explanation eventually. I might have figured out that the kitchen had a hidden draft. Maybe the oven vent activated at certain times. Maybe air moved through a particular part of the house in a way I did not notice. Maybe the towel had caught on something and released at the exact wrong moment. But it did not happen again. Not once. The towel hung on the oven every day after that, like a normal kitchen towel. No one else saw it move. No one else reported anything strange. The house remained ordinary, and I was left with one memory: a quiet kitchen, a laptop open on the table, everyone asleep upstairs, a towel hanging from an oven handle, then a sudden movement that did not fit any explanation I could find. I have tried to reason through it. Maybe the towel had been hanging in a strange way and slipped upward when the fabric shifted, but I cannot understand how gravity would lift it outward and hold it level. Maybe an air current moved through the kitchen, but there was no air conditioning running, no fan, no open window, and no movement in anything else around it. Maybe I saw it wrong. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe I had been staring at the laptop for too long. Maybe my eyes caught only a fast movement, and my brain filled in the rest. Maybe the towel moved in a way that looked impossible, because I saw it out of the corner of my eye, but I was looking directly at it. I remember the exact angle. I remember the towel parallel to the floor. I remember it hanging there for about a second before dropping back down. Maybe memory has sharpened the event over time. That can happen. A strange moment becomes stranger every time you replay it. You remember it with more clarity than you had in real life. You attach meaning to it because you want to understand why it happened. I know that is possible too. But even if memory has changed the edges of it, the core remains. Something moved that towel, or at least something made it look like it was moved by an unseen hand. And I have never been able to explain it. I do not tell the story because I want people to think I am special. I do not think I was chosen. I do not think I accidentally opened a portal in my kitchen. I do not think I communicated with a dead relative, an angel, a demon, or anything else people might attach to a story like this. I do not know what happened, but I know how it made me feel. It did not make me suddenly religious. It did not give me a clear belief about the afterlife. It did not answer every question I had about faith, death, nihilism, or whether there is meaning beyond the physical world. But it gave me a pause, a real pause. Whenever I get into that mindset, where I start thinking there is nothing after this life, that existence is only a short stretch of awareness between two huge periods of nothing, I remember that kitchen. I remember the quiet. I remember the towel. I remember it rising. And I think, maybe we do not know everything. Maybe there are things we cannot measure yet. Maybe the world is stranger than it appears when we are busy rushing through it. Maybe there is more than one way for reality to be real. Or maybe there is a perfectly ordinary explanation that I have simply never found. That is possible too. I am not trying to convince anyone. I know how corny it might sound when I tell it out loud. A person questions the universe, asks for a sign, then sees a kitchen towel move by itself. It sounds almost too neat, like the kind of story a movie would write. The skeptical person asks a question, then receives a small, impossible answer. But it happened. At least, it happened as clearly as anything I remember. And the timing is what keeps me thinking about it. I had asked for something. I had asked whether there was anything listening. I had asked whether there was more than this life. Nothing happened at the time. Then, days or weeks later, when I had stopped waiting, I was sitting alone in a quiet kitchen and watched something ordinary do something impossible. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was physics. Maybe it was an unnoticed draft. Maybe it was a trick of memory. But the moment itself did not feel ordinary. It felt like a warning, not a threatening warning, not something evil, more like a reminder that some doors are better left closed if you are not prepared to see what might be on the other side. That is why I did not chase it. I did not start trying to summon signs. I did not meditate harder. I did not go looking for ghosts or spirits. I did not start asking for proof every night. I did the opposite. I mentally shut it down. I decided that I had seen enough. And maybe that is why nothing like it ever happened again. Or maybe it was never anything more than one strange movement of fabric in a quiet kitchen. I cannot prove either way. All I know is that every now and then, when life starts feeling too empty or too meaningless, I remember that red-brown kitchen towel lifting itself straight out from the oven, and I remember thinking, for the first time in a long time, that maybe there is something we do not understand, something beyond what we can see, something quiet enough to make no sound at all, but strong enough to lift a towel and make a person question everything. I was around 12 years old in 2002 when my parents took my siblings and me to a road in the northeastern part of Oklahoma that local people called Spook Light Road. I do not remember the official name of the road, if it even had one, that people used. Everyone just called it Spook Light Road, or something close to that. It was one of those local places with a reputation. People talked about it as though it was haunted, cursed, or connected to strange sightings. Some people said there was a ghost light that appeared in the distance. Others claimed they had seen figures, heard voices, or watched things move where nothing should have been. To adults, it may have been just a creepy road with a story attached to it. To us kids, it was an adventure. My parents would take my siblings and me there almost every weekend. Looking back, it seems strange, but at the time it was just something we did. We would pile into the car after dark and drive down that eerie road, hoping to see something scary. Sometimes we saw nothing. Sometimes there were distant headlights, animals near the side of the road, or shadows in the trees that made us jump. Sometimes one of us would swear we saw something, but it would turn out to be a fence post, a mailbox, a branch, or a reflection in the window. But the road itself always felt creepy. It was dark, in a way that regular roads were not. There were stretches with no houses nearby, no streetlights, and no signs that anyone was awake for miles. The headlights would cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness, showing only what was directly in front of the car. Everything beyond that was black fields, trees, fences, and open land. At 12 years old, that darkness felt endless. I remember sitting in the back seat with my siblings, looking out the windows and waiting for something to appear. Every little movement outside made us lean closer to the glass. A shadow near a fence line could become a person. A shape in the field could become an animal. A distant light could become the famous spook light everyone talked about. There was always a mixture of excitement and fear. We wanted to see something, but we also did not want to see something. That was the point of going. You wanted the story, but you wanted to be safe inside the car when it happened. One night, the road gave us something I have never been able to explain. It was the last time I ever agreed to go back. We were driving down the road like we had done many times before. I do not remember whether we had already been there for a while or whether we had only just started down the darker part of the road. I remember the car moving steadily, the headlights stretching ahead of us, and the usual silence that fell over everyone when we were waiting for something strange to happen. Then we saw a fire in the distance. At first it looked like a glow somewhere off the road, a bright orange flicker beyond the dark field. My first thought was that someone had a bonfire going. Maybe people were camping. Maybe a farmer was burning something. Maybe it was a controlled fire or a pile of brush. That seemed possible. There are plenty of reasons to see fire in the distance in rural areas, but as we got closer, it became clear that this was not a normal bonfire. The fire was large. It formed a circle. It was not spread out randomly across the ground. It was not a pile of wood burning in one spot. It looked like a huge ring of flames in an open field, surrounding a single tree. That tree stood in the middle of the fire. Even now, that is the image I remember most clearly. A single tree, standing in the center of an open field. A circle of fire around it. Darkness everywhere else. The flames were high enough that they lit the field around them in orange and yellow. The light reached through the darkness and made the tree look black against the fire. The branches stood out sharply, like something drawn in ink. At first, I was too shocked to understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the figures. There were shadowy shapes moving inside the circle of fire. They looked like people. They seemed to be dancing around the tree. I remember seeing them clearly enough that I did not think they were just flames. They were dark against the bright fire, moving in ways that looked intentional. They went around the tree in the center, circling it as though they were part of some ritual. The closer we came, the more unreal it felt. The car kept moving toward the field. I remember being pressed toward the window, trying to see better. My siblings may have been watching too. My parents were in the front, driving closer, and no one said much at first because I think we were all trying to process the same thing. The fire should have made noise. That is something I think about now. A fire that large should have had sound. You should have heard crackling, popping, wind moving through the flames, maybe voices from the people standing around it. But I do not remember hearing anything. I only remember seeing it. The flames, the circle, the tree, the dark figures moving around it. The whole thing seemed too bright against the black field. It was as though someone had placed a scene from a nightmare in the middle of nowhere and waited for us to drive past. We got closer. Closer than we should have. I remember thinking we were maybe 10 feet away. That may not be exact, but we were close enough that the fire filled our view. We were close enough that I expected to feel heat through the car window. We were close enough that I could see the figures moving in front of the flames. They were still dancing. At least that is what it looked like. Their shapes moved around the tree in a circle. Their bodies were dark, almost completely black against the bright fire. I could not see faces. I could not make out clothing. I could not tell whether they were adults, teenagers, or something else. I only knew they looked like people. Then, suddenly, they disappeared. Not one at a time. Not by running away. Not by ducking behind the tree. They were simply gone. One moment, there were shadowy figures moving in the firelight. The next, there were none. The fire remained, the tree remained, the field remained, but the people were gone. I remember staring at the empty circle around the tree, trying to make sense of it. It did not happen gradually. There was no time for them to scatter. There was no visible path for them to run down. No cars nearby, no buildings, no place to hide. They vanished from sight as though they had never been there. The whole thing felt unreal. That is the only word for it. It was not like seeing a normal frightening thing. It was more like watching something that your mind could not accept as real. The road, the car, the field, and the tree all looked normal. But the fire did not make sense. The figures did not make sense. Their sudden disappearance made even less sense. I remember feeling a kind of cold fear move through me. Not the fun fear we usually wanted when we went to Spooklight Road. Not the kind where you laugh after someone jumps out at you. This was different. I did not want to keep looking. I did not want to get out of the car. I did not want to go back there again. And after that night, I refused. My parents continued to act as though the road was just a spooky place to drive around, but I did not want anything to do with it anymore. Whatever we had seen that night had changed it for me. Before that, Spooklight Road had been a game, a creepy place with a local legend. After that, it felt like somewhere we had seen something we were not supposed to see. For years, I remembered the event clearly. The more time passed, the stranger it became. I would think about it and wonder whether I had misunderstood what was happening. Maybe there really had been people in the field. Maybe it was some kind of bonfire gathering. Maybe the circle of flames was part of an event or a prank. Maybe the figures only looked like they disappeared because the car moved or the headlights changed the angle of the light. That would be the easiest explanation. A group of people around a fire can look bizarre at night. Flames create moving shadows. Distance can distort shape and size. A tree in the center of a bonfire could make it seem as though people were circling it, when really they were standing behind it or moving around outside the fire. Maybe we saw ordinary people doing something we did not understand. Maybe the darkness made it seem more supernatural than it was. Maybe the figures ran into the field at the exact moment our eyes were blocked by the tree, the fire, or the movement of the car. But there are things I cannot fit into that explanation. The fire was a perfect circle. The figures disappeared too quickly. And we were close enough that there should have been more evidence of what we were seeing. There should have been smoke. There should have been sound. There should have been heat. There should have been tire tracks, people, vehicles, or some sign that a group had been standing in an open field, surrounded by a huge ring of flames. I do not remember any of that. I remember only the fire, the tree, the dancing shadows. Then, nothing. What makes the story even stranger is that my parents deny it happened. Not just that they deny seeing the figures, they deny taking us there at all. They deny the trips to Spooklight Road. They deny the night of the fire. They deny that we used to go down that road almost every weekend looking for something scary. That has always confused me. I know memories can be unreliable. I know siblings can remember childhood events differently. I know parents may forget things that felt huge to their children, but ordinary to them. Maybe they did take us there, but it did not seem important enough for them to remember decades later. Maybe they only went once or twice, while I remember it as happening more often, because it was such a big event for me. Maybe I blended together several nights, several stories, and several trips into one stronger memory. Maybe the fire was part of a dream I had after hearing local legends. Maybe I was half asleep in the back seat and created something in my mind from the shapes outside the window. All of those possibilities exist, but the memory does not feel like a dream. It feels too detailed. I remember the road, I remember the darkness pressing against the windows. I remember seeing the orange glow ahead of us. I remember the fire growing larger as we got closer. I remember the single tree in the middle. I remember the figures moving around it. And I remember the exact moment they were gone. It was clear enough that I never wanted to go back. That is what makes me believe it happened in some form. Even if I misunderstood what I saw, the fear was real. The image was real enough to stay with me. And the road itself was real. People called it Spooklight Road for a reason. It had its own stories long before I ever went there. Maybe that influenced me. Maybe I expected something strange and turned an ordinary scene into something supernatural. But expectation alone does not usually create such a specific memory. I still think about the fire sometimes. I imagine the car moving slowly down the road. I imagine the headlights reaching the open field. I imagine the circle of flames burning around that one tree. I imagine the dark shapes moving in the middle of it. Then I imagine the figures disappearing the moment we got close enough to see them clearly. There is something especially unsettling about seeing a group of people where there should not be any people, then watching them vanish before you can understand who they are. It is worse than seeing one shadow, worse than hearing a strange noise, because people are supposed to be explainable. If you see people, you expect to be able to ask them what they are doing. You expect them to have cars, voices, faces, and somewhere to go. You expect a fire to be connected to an event, a gathering, or a reason. But those figures had none of that. They were just shadows dancing around a burning circle. And then they were gone. I do not know whether it was a real ritual, a prank, an ordinary fire seen under strange conditions, or something I still do not understand. I do know that it was the last time I ever went down that road willingly. After that night, I did not want another adventure. I did not want to see another ghost light. I did not want to search for another strange story in the dark. I had seen enough. And even now, when I think of northeastern Oklahoma at night, I do not think first about the road, the trees, or the local legend. I think about a single tree in an open field, a huge circle of fire around it, and figures dancing in the flames until the moment we got close enough to know they were really there. About 20 years ago, I was outside on my dad's back porch smoking a cigarette when I saw something in the sky that I still cannot explain. It was an ordinary night in every other way. I was completely sober. I had not been drinking, taking anything, or staying awake for days. I was not in the middle of telling ghost stories or watching a science fiction movie. I was simply outside for a cigarette, standing on my dad's back porch and enjoying a few quiet minutes alone. The porch faced the backyard, and beyond it was a line of trees. It was dark, but not completely black. There was enough light from nearby houses, porch lights, and the sky itself to make out the shape of the yard and the tops of the trees. It was one of those normal nighttime moments that most people forget as soon as they go back inside. I remember holding the cigarette and looking out into the dark while I smoked. I was probably thinking about nothing important. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was just enjoying the silence after being around people in the house. The backyard was still. The trees were dark shapes against the sky, and there were no unusual sounds coming from anywhere. Then I went to ash my cigarette. That was when I noticed the light. At first I thought it was something ordinary. A plane, maybe, a helicopter in the distance, a tower light, a reflection from something behind me. It was floating above the tree line, low enough that it stood out immediately, but high enough that it did not look like someone standing in a yard with a flashlight. It had a reddish-gray color, though even now that is difficult to describe properly. It was not a bright, clean red like a warning light. It was not white like a star. It was not yellow like a streetlight. It looked dull and strange, almost like a grayish-red glow wrapped in haze. The more I looked at it, the more wrong it felt. It was hovering. That was the first thing that made me pay real attention. It was not moving from left to right like an airplane. It was not blinking. It was not rising or lowering in a way that looked like a helicopter. It was simply there, suspended above the tops of the trees. I stood still and watched it. At first, I kept trying to talk myself out of being unsettled. There had to be a normal reason for it. Maybe I was seeing a plane coming straight toward me, so it only looked like it was not moving. Maybe it was farther away than I thought. Maybe the tree line was making the angle strange. But I kept watching, and it stayed in the same place. It did not drift. It did not make a sound. It did not flash or change color. It just hovered there above the trees. I remember feeling something change inside me. Not exactly panic, more like a deep, immediate recognition that I was looking at something out of the ordinary. It is hard to explain that feeling unless you have experienced something similar. You can tell yourself that you are probably mistaken, but some part of you has already noticed that the thing in front of you does not behave the way it should. The backyard suddenly felt different. A few seconds earlier, I had been standing outside without a care in the world. Now I was watching the sky, holding a cigarette I had forgotten about, trying to decide whether I should wake someone up. The light remained there for maybe 20 seconds. That may not sound long, but when you are staring at something you cannot explain, 20 seconds feels much longer. It gave me enough time to study it, enough time to realize it was not behaving like any aircraft I had ever seen, enough time to feel certain that it was not just a star or a distant light. It was above the tree line. It was close enough to see clearly, and it was completely still. I remember trying to judge its size, but there was nothing nearby to compare it to. It could have been small and close, or huge and far away. That is one of the frustrating things about seeing lights in the sky. Distance is almost impossible to judge at night, especially when there is no sound and no obvious point of reference. Still, whatever it was, it did not look right. Then it moved. There was no warning. It did not slowly begin to travel. It did not build speed the way a car, airplane, or helicopter would. It went from a complete standstill to moving across the sky faster than anything I had ever seen. 1 second, it was hovering over the trees. The next, it shot away. It crossed the sky in an instant. I do not mean it moved quickly in the ordinary sense. I mean it seemed to take off at a speed that did not look possible. There was no gradual acceleration, no hesitation, no engine sound, no visible trail. It simply launched itself from where it had been hanging in the sky and streaked away into the distance. I remember watching it go. My eyes followed it across the dark sky as long as they could. It became smaller almost immediately, then disappeared farther away. I stood there for a moment with my heart pounding, trying to understand what I had just seen. The first thought I had was that I needed someone else to see it. I did not want to be the only person standing there with that memory. So I ran through the house. I went inside quickly, probably leaving the porch door open or shutting it harder than I meant to. I rushed through the rooms toward the front of the house, hoping that if I could get outside or look through a front window, I might still see the light in the sky. As I ran through the house, I told my dad there was a UFO outside. I probably sounded crazy. I was excited, scared, and trying to explain something I did not understand. I remember telling him that there was something in the sky, that it had been hovering over the trees, and that it had shot off at impossible speed. He did not believe me. I cannot blame him. If someone bursts into the house saying they saw a UFO, most people assume they saw a plane, a satellite, a drone, a star, or something they misunderstood. That is the sensible reaction. My dad did not have the same strange feeling I had. He had not been standing on the porch watching it hover for 20 seconds. To him, it was probably just his kid getting worked up over a light in the sky. But I knew what I had seen, or at least I knew what it looked like. I made it toward the front of the house and tried to see it again, but it was gone. The sky looked normal. There were no strange lights, no sound, no flashing object in the distance, nothing to point at. That made the whole experience feel even stranger. If it had stayed in the sky, maybe someone else would have seen it. Maybe we could have watched it together and figured out what it was. Maybe it would have become obvious that it was a plane or some kind of aircraft. But it was gone. All I had was the memory of it hanging above the trees, motionless and silent, before suddenly taking off across the sky. I have thought about that night many times since then. I have tried to come up with practical explanations. Maybe it was a helicopter, but I do not remember hearing any sound, and it did not behave like a helicopter. It did not rise slowly or move in a natural way. It stayed perfectly still, then moved too quickly and too suddenly. Maybe it was an airplane, but airplanes have lights that blink. They move steadily. Even if one is coming toward you, there is usually some sign of movement or changing lights. And when an airplane changes direction, it does not suddenly shoot away from a dead stop like something launched from a slingshot. Maybe it was a military aircraft or some kind of experimental technology. That is possible. I have no way of knowing what was flying in the area at the time. There are plenty of aircraft people do not recognize, and things can look strange at night. Distance, darkness, and perspective can make even familiar things seem impossible. Maybe it was a meteor. But it did not fall from the sky. It hovered first. It remained above the tree line for long enough that I could watch it. Then it moved across the sky horizontally, or at least that is how it appeared. Maybe it was a drone. But this was about 20 years ago, long before drones were common in the way they are now. Even if it had been some kind of remote-controlled aircraft, the sudden speed and the way it disappeared did not match anything I had seen before. Maybe I misjudged everything. Maybe the object was farther away than I realized. Maybe it was moving in a direction that made its path seem impossible. Maybe the reddish-gray color was caused by haze, clouds, or light pollution. Maybe the object did not actually hover, and my eyes simply could not detect its movement. All of that could be true. I am not claiming I know what it was. I am not saying it was definitely an alien craft. I do not have pictures. I do not have video. No one else stood on the porch with me and watched it, but I know the feeling I had when I saw it. That feeling has stayed with me longer than the sight of the light itself. There was something about it that made me feel small, not in a dramatic way. Not like I suddenly believed I had been chosen or watched by something from another world. It was more like realizing that the sky is bigger than we think it is. We look up at night and see stars, planes, clouds, and familiar lights. We assume we understand what we are seeing because most of the time we do. A light moves in the distance, and there is an explanation. A sound comes from the sky, and it is an aircraft. A flash appears, and it is lightning or a passing car reflecting off something. But every now and then, you see something that does not fit neatly into the categories you know, and for a few seconds, you are left standing there with no answer. That is what happened to me. I did not feel terrified while I watched it. I was too focused, too confused, and too surprised. But after it took off, I felt an adrenaline rush that made me run through the house. I wanted someone else to tell me I had seen it. I wanted my dad to look out the window and say, "There it is." I wanted proof that I had not just imagined the whole thing. But there was no proof. There was only my memory. A reddish-gray light hovering above the tree line. 20 seconds of complete stillness. Then an instant of impossible speed. Then darkness again. To this day, I still do not know what it was. I have seen planes, helicopters, stars, satellites, and distant lights since then. I have watched aircraft pass overhead at night. I have seen things in the sky that looked strange for a second, then became obvious once I paid attention. Nothing has looked like that. Nothing has made me feel the way that light made me feel. It may have had a simple explanation that I will never discover. It may have been something ordinary seen from a strange angle, or it may have been something I simply do not have the knowledge to identify. Whatever it was, I will always remember standing on my dad's porch with a cigarette in my hand, looking up at a light that should not have been able to move the way it did. And I will always remember the moment it went from perfectly still to gone. The lights may be back on, but that does not always mean the danger is gone. Every person you heard tonight had one thing in common. They saw, heard, or felt something that changed the way they looked at darkness forever. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Subscribe to the Blackout Witness for more true stories from the moments people wish they could forget. And tonight, before you switch off the last light in your room, look twice at the window.